Welcome, I'm Yellow, and this is American Graffiti, specifically the 50th anniversary 4K edition, and it is infamous as being one of the worst 4K transfers of all time. This movie was shot on a budget of $750,000 in 1973, which was a modest budget, and it was shot on 2% film, which meant it was grainy. It was about half the regular size. And this release has almost no grain in it. So it's like Lucas's other digital revisionisms, not quite as egregious as the plethora of changes he made in Star Wars, but there are changes, mainly a few scene additions, which, I prefer the film with them in them, but there is no way to watch the film as it was theatrically released, which was, it was one of the highest grossing films of all time. I think it's still among the top highest grossing films in terms of return on the budget. So, to do that version of the film justice, I am attempting to create a theatrical Despecialized edition, which seeks to restore the original opening credits, which is the main major change, and getting rid of those three extra scenes that were re-added back in, which amounts to about 5 minutes of screen time, and trying to restore a filmic look, because beyond just removing a bunch of grain from the image, AI was used to enhance details and basically destroyed the picture. So we will be looking at several techniques within DaVinci Resolve. That's my main editing software. So I'm using this 4K release, somewhat surprisingly, I suppose, as the base image, so as the main source. And the reason I'm doing that is because while it's not a great release for reasons I've just stated, but the image quality in places is nice, and I think it'll serve as a better base image than the Blu-ray, for example, would. Here's the 4K. And here's a film scan. So this is, to my knowledge, the only publicly accessible film scan of the film. So this is the theatrical version, so we can see this will be our source for the end title cards, which has Milner as dying in June 1964 as opposed to December, as it was changed in the 1978 re-release to line up with more American Graffiti. But anyway, I'll just show you what I've got going on here, basically. We've got audio sources, so we've got the 35mm mono, and this is the mono track from that print scan. I will just say the print scan, it's an AI upscale, so it's in 1080, but it's been AI upscaled from 480p. And I can't remember who upscaled it or who did that, but that's the one I've got. So it's good enough to grab stuff like the graphics, like these original titles here. You'll see that on the 4K they were replaced with these just horrible looking digital recreations, but they're not even recreations. They don't even look anything like the original titles. Anyway, so it's a good enough source for that kind of stuff. So got the mono. It's the only source of the mono track. So in 1978 they did a stereo mix, and that's been the only version of the mix available on home media. And then, of course, this 4K release didn't even include that 1978 stereo mix. It included a new 5.1 track, and it included a 2.0 track, but it was a 2.0 down mix of that new 5.1 track. And the 5.1 track has some terrible newly added sound effects, and it heavily favors dialogue over music and over sound effects. But again, then comparing the stereo track to the original mono, you'll hear how different it is. So again, this is supposed to be the theatrical version, so I'm including the mono. There are a few instances where there is missing audio because there is also missing frames in the print. So that's annoying, but I will just have to patch that audio in with that stereo track, unfortunately. I've got these other sources here, these other audio sources here, just for reference again for patching in if I need to. But enough about the audio. Here's the video. So I've got the 35mm scan, which is serving as my reference. So I can see if the 4K is in line in terms of in frame sync, because some of the cuts are up to 5 frames off between them, mostly between scene transitions. So most of the frames are in there, they're just offset, which causes some more issues with the audio, which is why I probably won't include the 78 track when this is done and released. But here you'll see the 4K. So that's the print. Obviously it's quite magenta. The colors are not accurate, so I'm not using it as any kind of reference color-wise. And there's the 4K. If I just go into color here, you'll see that the 4K, I've converted it from Rec 2020 into DaVinci Wide Gamut and outputting Rec 79 Gamma 2.4. So this won't be, sorry, this is the 4K. This one. It won't be an HDR because HDR workflows are just a bit more complicated. I don't have an HDR monitor. Well, it is HDR, but it's not set up to be HDR, so we're just going SDR for this. But let me show you what I'm doing here. So again, this is the 4K image as it comes into Resolve. And that's because it's an HDR image and it's in Rec 2020. So I convert it to Rec 709. And again, it's dark. That's because again, it's not mapping everything correctly. So raise the brightness a bit. And then I've got this film LUT. So you'll see it kind of just helps with the contrast. It adds a bit more of a natural filmic look. Feels a bit warmer. Not the greatest frame to show you, but and there's a bit of saturation enhancement and just some manual color tweaking. So that's kind of at the moment what I've got for the look. And then on top of all that, I've got grain, right? So you'll notice straight away the difference that makes. And we can see here in this frame that I've paused on, it's not just grain, it's also scratches. When I'm talking about the film look, that's how I'm trying to counteract the things that Lucas's team did to scrub the image and basically make it look like it was shot digitally, which I don't know why you'd want to do, because the aesthetics of this film are top notch. They're incredible. And so obviously by adding grain back, it's not the real grain. I don't have that grain pattern. It's just a grain pattern that I found on the internet, and it's still not going to completely counteract the issues with the image. There are some shots that are overly sharpened. I feel like this is a fairly good example. We cut from this lovely shot, probably my favorite shot in the film, which is a different issue and took a lot of work, but I'll get to that. And you kind of see this shot, it's not amazing. So I've also got this film damage effect, and this is doing a few things. If I take it off, we can see that's before, that's after. So it is actually adding some warmth to the image. But if you look here by this car's wing mirror, you'll see it's also blurring the image a touch, and you'll see these dots here. And of course, you might go, well, why am I taking sharpness out of the image? And that's to attempt to counteract the over-sharpened look that's been applied here. The cars especially, cars and faces look especially bad. Because again, I mean, this shot, if we look at the print. Now again, this print is also AI upscaled, so we can't trust it, but it's less so than the 4K. So you'll notice that those circles have kind of been, they're there. Whereas I feel like this shot originally was probably a bit out of focus. And so when you try to sharpen that, it just looks off. And so again, blurring the shot touch is helping, in my mind, to just counteract those shots where it's over sharpened. And every single shot has some level of blurring on it. If we look here, so this is without blurring, you'll notice Toad is a really good example of a face that gets mangled by the AI sharpening. You'll see the glasses feel overly sharp for some reason. Ear looks weird, but the hair especially. Right, he's got the slicked back 60s hair, and it's just, there's no detail in it. It's just a blob of something. And so blurring it again, I'm losing detail, but I think it's a worthwhile trade-off to make the image more natural. And when you add the grain back on top, just kind of looks like the shot's not perfectly in focus. That's the compromise I've got at the moment. Again, it's not perfect, but it's what I think I have to do. The eyes always just look a bit cursed. And so softening them up, they just look bad. Anyway, enough about the sharpening and all that stuff. We could go on forever. You get the idea. So I'll just get onto color right now. If we look at this comparison video I made, we've got the telecine scan, my current version, and then the 4K and Blu-ray official releases. You'll see that the color-wise, majorly, mine obviously looks fairly similar to the official releases, and that's for obvious reasons. I'm using it as the base, and as you saw, I haven't made that many color changes. The main difference would be in these yellows. You'll see mine are far more saturated. The picture's lighter in general. Skin tones are a bit more inviting, shall we say, than this dull green hue that everything has. And the telecine, obviously, like I said, not a color reference source because it's just faded to magenta. I feel even with minimal adjustments, my current version looks far better than any of these other sources. Again, like American Graffiti is described as that the color palette's a jukebox, right? It's this rainbow. That doesn't mean oversaturating everything, of course not, but it feels more alive, I'd say, than these ones. But enough about that. I do want to show you specifically this scene. So this is the telecine. That's the 4K. Again, it's been stabilized, obviously. Over sharpened a lot. And then there's my current version. And so that's just the one shot, right? If we go to the timeline, we can see it was it took a while to really get that comp to look decent. So it's made up of several different elements. So right away on the 4K, you can see pretty big issue, right? Which is that the yellow part of the sign up here has been masked. And it's a terrible mask. And that creates an issue down the line when this car drives by. And again, a lot of you will know this, where they didn't mask the car out. So the car just goes straight over this mask. I mean, talk about an absolutely lazy release. It's sad to see. It's really sad to see. So bringing back the scan for this top part gets rid of that issue. And we have to stabilize it quite a lot. Still not perfect, it could use some work, but it does the trick. And then here, I brought back the sky from the 4K. So you'll see, this is the sky on the scan. Again, it's kind of been over sharpened, and it's quite grainy, so the grain's been over sharpened, so it looks rather unnatural. So I thought bringing back the sky from the 4K was a cleaner option, and then of course I've got my layer of grain on top of everything, which just makes everything cohesive, brings the grain back to the image. Everything in the image is the 4K, with just this sign being from the scan. But of course, I ran into the same issue where I needed to do my own mask of the car, right? So it's not perfect. You'll notice this section will start to get a bit more pink as we go through, and it kind of fades off. So I do need to work on that a bit more. But that's because I was masking the roof of the car from the scan, whereas the rest of the car's from the 4K. Still needs a bit more work, but one of my favourite shots in the film, and so it deserves to look good again. So here are the titles. They're sourced from the scan, because of course the most infamous change is the font and the sky. So I grabbed a still from the scan and then stabilized the text and masked it out. So that helped minimize the dirt in the original scan, and it stabilized the shot and just allowed me to stabilize the credits a bit more. So one last thing to touch on is the Universal logo. So in the 78 re-release, they changed it to Universal and MCA Company Presents, and so Presents is in a different font, and it's different. Whereas in the original film, it's just like this. So originally, I was using a reconstruction. Basically, I'd found this source of the Universal logo online that was similar, not the same, but I basically masked out the A and picture for Universal Presents with the telecine. But I got pointed to this much better source on originaltrilogy.com forums to this one, so it was way more stretched. As you can see, that's the original logo, and this is from the film Two Lane Blacktop. So basically, I just stretched the logo to match and used this other source to extend the edges, because as you can see, without it, that's the actual size of it once I stretched it. So I needed to fill in the edges and then kind of disguise it. Again, it needs a bit more color work because it's quite green, especially compared to this other one, but it does the trick for now. So that's the last thing I wanted to touch on. Again, a lot of the major compositing work is out of the way, like this shot. And from here, it's more of the kind of boring stuff, like blurring shots a bit more when they're overly sharpened, and making sure that all the shots are frame accurate to the scan. So that's where I'm at. Here's a really nice shot. I've always really liked this shot here.